Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much for talking to Diplomatic Connections. And I think what I'll do is I start with the recent Baltic Summit, at which your head of state and the head of state of Lithuania and Latvia and Estonia met with the President Trump. Could you just give me your perspective on that particular summit?
Of course, and I think it was a highlight year for us for this year. So all three Baltic states were very happy that, and it was not just a working meeting, which we would, you would have from time to time. It was upgraded to the level of summit, U.S. Baltic Summit. That's the first time we had the summit like this, and I think, of course, the very year when we celebrate 100 years of our restoration of independence in Lithuanian case and the other Baltics. So, of course, it's a big highlight, and it was very well received, of course, back at home. So when the message of the partnership with the United States came very strongly out of this. The meetings themselves, they had very good emotional charge. So it really was, very good content. We discussed, of course, the security issues, economic ties between the Baltic states and the United States, and of course, among the other things, a lot of energy security. You could see. So it was rich in content, but also it was also emotionally very well charged. So very positively stressing the highlights of our long-standing relationship. We are very proud what we have is United States, and United States should be proud of itself because I think the Baltic country story is a very strong story of principled policy of United States. And of course, when you look back, U.S. never recognized our occupation by the Soviet Union, so it always was standing by us, and it helped actually even this building. It helped us to maintain this building.
This building, I think, has been your embassy throughout World War II.
So if you look back, so you would see that when you say, okay, Lithuania was occupied, but piece of Lithuania was never occupied because the diplomatic representation and of course its soil of the diplomatic representation is a soil of Lithuania by the diplomatic agreement. So this piece of land was never occupied by the Soviets. And that's why I claim and I like to run this parallel that this building is like a monument to our bilateral relationship. And when we were running out of office space, we never considered to abandon this building because it was so emotionally charged. And going back to the summit, so it was very rich in content, and it was also very rich in emotional background, stressing our friendship, our partnership through the years, and of course it's a very special occasion for us.
I want to quote not your president, but President Kriščiūnas of Latvia, who said in advance of the summit that the Baltic states, and this is the quote, expected a very strong political message from the U.S., expressing support for strengthening Baltic security and expressing once again support for the independence of the Baltic states. In your view, did the U.S. actually live up to this expectation?
Yes, of course, without any slightest doubt. So that was, as I said, very strongly emotionally charged meeting in a positive light, because they are also, mostly on the positive things, told. And of course, partners, you could discuss any issue anywhere, but taking the occasion, as I said, there was a lot of stress how much we accomplished together, because we talked about NATO, of course, and where the NATO is heading, so we were discussing some issues which are of interest to the President, who would expect of United States, who would expect NATO to be stronger, the burden within the NATO shared more equally than it is today. So, and that's also of the Baltic interests. So we would like to see NATO stronger, and we would like to see the United States are happy with where NATO is going, because the United States is a very important ally in NATO.
However, as far as the actual contribution to NATO is concerned, President Trump must have been very pleased because all three of the Baltic states, as far as I can remember, actually live up to this unofficial but now widely discussed 2% of GDP in defense expense.
That's right. All of us, we are above 2%, and we are not stopping there. So we are currently discussing in Lithuania among all major parties to have a political agreement, how we will be heading to much bigger amounts for the next 5 years. So it's not kind of a goal per se which we achieved and we will stop there. So no, we are looking forward to increase it even further. And that's of course, we are very good examples for the United States, which is also showing the Baltic states to the other NATO members and saying, look, the Baltics could do it, you also should be able to do it.
Right
exactly, you should be doing it also. And that's what we also it strengthens our position. Because we are not security consumers. Because sometimes I don't like the attitude, why we are you hear voices from time to time, why we should be in the Baltics, we are not consumers of security, we're also producers of security. So whenever the United States invited us, to join their forces in Afghanistan, we've been there. Mm-hmm. If we are asked to contribute in Iraq, of course, to our capacity, we are contributing in Iraq. So we are always listening to whatever is asked by our partners, and we deliver to our ability. And that's, I think, what NATO should be. Everyone should be delivering to its ability. And that's why I said that the discussion on the increasing contributions by the other states, it does not concern us. We believe also that, the more member states will be contributing to the NATO in defense expenditures, of course, it will strengthen NATO, not will weaken NATO. So that's why we see from the same angle NATO.
You were on the frontier of both NATO and the EU. And if I remember rightly, the communique that came out, the summit communique, actually specifically mentioned Article 5 in NATO. The question I have is, how concerned are you about what is going on in your neighborhood and Russian aggression in other directions, not necessarily yours, but perhaps even in yours?
Yeah. Of course we are concerned. It will be very, I would say, not smart not to be concerned. But when you see the country, which is a very big neighbor of ours, doing the things it did in Crimea, earlier in Georgia, in eastern Ukraine, of course you are concerned. Because you would like to search for reason. Why is this happening? Why? And what we could expect next. Because this kind of behavior, of course, raises all kinds of questions. Of course, our situation is much different from any other country in the region, because the Baltic states are part of NATO, and of course it comforts us. But at the same time, we always claiming to our partners that you cannot relax. The concern should not be, oh, that's terrible, and but we should be very rational about it. If Russia believes that NATO is real, for real, what it claims in Article 5, it will deliver without any slightest doubt, nothing will be happening. So that's the key task, for us to convince that NATO is a serious thing. It's not something, just an idea, and which will collapse, with the first test, if anyone, just wants to test it. Yeah. And so therefore, that's what we are claiming. And when we discuss together with the ministers or state leaders within the NATO, that we should be very clear with our messaging and with our steps. Because what Russia understands best is actions. Because words, sometimes it seems like they very little, in Russia. They will tell all different stories, and have their different versions on any interpretation of anything what is happening. But the actual steps, what we do, and I think we did a lot of strong steps.
For example, there is now a NATO military presence in all three of the Baltics. Is that, which I believe is called the battalion, the forward presence battalion battle group?
Yeah, it's enhanced forward presence. The decision taken
you have
in
members
Warsaw.
of that group in Lithuania?
Yes. And our key,
Americans?
in our case, in Lithuania, we have Germans at the core of battalion. Then there are smaller regiments of different countries. So it's kind of very colorful representation there. But each country has one country which is a leading country in this. So in our case, it's Germany. In Latvian case, it's Canada. And in Estonian case, it's UK, United Kingdom.
That's right.
Yeah. And in Poland, they have the United States.
Yes. And the other dimension to this is also an aerial activity in order to discourage overflights and so on. You have that too, I presume.
Oh yeah, there is. Of course, we always had the air policing, which was already stationed in Lithuania.
Are they French?
And they are rotating, so they move. So you will have for some period Poles, for example. For some period you will have French. You will have Belgium. The countries which pledged to participate in this arrangement, or U.S. So those are there. So it's also a very strong component because just last week, for example, there was the planes were taken up.
Yes.
To inspect, the Russian plane which was approaching the airspace of Lithuania. Right. So that's, and it used to, in some.
Does it happen frequently?
It used to happen much more frequently than right now. But just from time to time, it's happening. It happens. But there was a period, when it was very often. So it's basically a day will not go by when you will see, something like this happening.
Geographically, of course, the Lithuanian case is somewhat different from Estonia and Latvia, because whereas Latvia and Estonia have direct borders with Russia, in your case you have this anomaly, if you like, of the Kaliningrad, which actually is sandwiched between you and the Poles, and that creates is it called the Suwałki corridor?
Yeah, Suwałki corridor.
Which actually is the way that the Russians in Kaliningrad have to access their part of the country, basically.
No. So Suwałki, it's the corridor.
It goes into Belarus.
It's a distance between Belarus and Belarusian border and the Kaliningrad border. So that's the distance which connects actually Baltic states and Poland.
That's right.
And the rest of NATO, you could say, or the rest of EU, and so on.
Precisely.
Yeah.
The Baltic says if you cut off, it's sort of like what used to be called the Fulda Gap in Germany in the Cold War.
Yeah. So you will see it very often, in any military considerations. If there are the defensive plans, of course, it's being taken into account, and you see, and you need to have a strategy how to deal with this, and so on. So that's why it's, of course, is being named in a number of discussions as a term. Yeah. But of course, for that you would say that Belarus should be taking it, for granted that it's almost like Russia, but still it's an independent country. Of course,
yes, it's a close ally.
Yeah, it's a close ally, of course, of Russia. And Kaliningrad district, we have special arrangements. Not a lot of people know that there are trains which are going through Lithuania to Kaliningrad district. Of course, there is an agreement what could be on the train, how often it could stop or not stop at all. So of course any information should be given, of course, in advance. So there will be our people on the train looking at there. So of course it's a special arrangement. And currently, for example, we discuss a lot of things because the soccer World Cup is approaching in Russia,
course, yes.
And some of the activity will be in Kaliningrad. Yes. So of course we need to discuss if the people will choose to go to Lithuania, or they will go somewhere, how to approach Kaliningrad, should they fly in, will they go by boat, will they be on train, so of course that's natural what you need to solve and discuss, and that's why our officials, responsible for certain tasks are discussing today.
But at the same time, certainly as far as Estonia and Latvia is concerned, there is actually Russian tourism coming into this. I mean, there are actually Russian tourists.
And in Lithuania, I wouldn't say that the statistics I saw recently. So we see, of course, there was a go down
on the Baltic beaches.
Yeah. So it's increasing. So the Russian tourists still keep on coming. So it's not, we are not enemies. Of course, being concerned about your neighbor, it doesn't mean that you are an enemy with this neighbor. So we are not at war or anything. So it's, of course, we still welcome the tourists, and they spend a good time, and they could. And they like Lithuania, they like Latvia, they like Estonia. So it's and we always say that we don't have any issues with Russia as population as such. Right. Of course, we have issues with the government of Putin's policies and so on. But there's a fine distinction between those things. And of course, we have a lot of Russian friends who are, for example, coming to Lithuania, and because they could speak freely and discuss different issues, and so on. So, for example, in this month, in a couple of weeks, we will have a Russian forum in Vilnius. So, where the Russians in exile and some from Russia will come together to Vilnius, becoming a traditional forum, and they will be discussing different issues. How it is, what is the policy, what to expect, what is the future, and so most of them, of course, democratic-minded people. Clearly, because they are, and they are not able to express it freely in Russia. So that's why they assemble in Vilnius, and we are quite eager to provide, because that's, as I said, we don't have any problems with Russia or Russian people. There are a lot of historical ties, and friends on both sides, and the culture of Russian people is very rich, and it's appreciated in Lithuania, also among the other cultures. And but the policies of the Putin's regime, of course, it raises a lot of questions and concerns for us.
But when you're back in Lithuania yourself, do you sense that there is a concern about all this, or do the Lithuanians get on with their lives and hope for the best? I mean, leave this concern to you.
When we are discussing all those serious topics, of course, it's not like in Lithuania everyone wakes up and says, "Are we still free or not?" It's nothing like this. So it's of course life goes as it was going just 10 years ago or 5 years ago. So the people have their ordinary coffee, go to streets, have fun, and work. So you don't feel any kind of tension or there. And of course, all this should be discussed, as I said. And we don't believe that there will be anything happening if the NATO is, sending very clear messaging. And that's what we are working with our partners. We should be sending our clear messaging, and that will save, for everyone. It's much easier in any process, to prevent something from happening than to deal with the consequences.
Can I ask you something about your personal background? It seems to me, from what I've been reading, that your background is more financial, economics, than it is on the diplomatic side. You've had, if I get this right, 2 diplomatic posts, both of them in the United States.
Yes.
Both of them in Washington, in fact.
Yeah.
But before that, you've been as far as Deputy Minister of Economics.
I was Deputy Minister of Finance. And I spent more than 10 years in the Ministry of Finance with some specific tasks. But I started my career as a diplomat.
I see.
So I entered diplomatic service. I went to the posting in Washington. And of course, upon returning to Lithuania, I was asked to perform certain functions, to establish department in the Ministry of Finance, which was taking over some functions from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, getting ready for the membership of Lithuanian European Union. Yes, so we had a lot of things done with this. Yeah, exactly. So there was some certain very specific tasks which I'm quite happy. I think we successfully implemented. I was a part of negotiations on some chapters, so-called negotiation chapters, in our EU membership negotiations. So everything went smoothly, so I accomplished tasks. And then of course I expected that I will stay there for 3 years.
Yeah.
But then, the subjects of my work were changing rapidly, new challenges. So it kept me involved and interested.
For the ministry,
yeah, I became an undersecretary, the vice minister, deputy minister, so the later vice minister. So there are just plenty of things which kept me there, and among them also was crisis. And
of course,
of 2009, Lehman Brothers collapse, and I do remember it was also a very hectic time when I would go to the same United States to convince people to buy our bonds, because we had some fiscal disbalances, our expenditures shot through the roof, and of course the income went down because unemployment was on the rise. So it was a very difficult, hectic time. But
did you reform the banks as well, as some of the other countries needed to do?
There were some banks which had some trouble, and of course we needed to take over them. So it was very, I would say, exciting professionally, but you would like to avoid this kind of excitement in your state affairs. But of course, everyone was touched there. But what I was happy that Lithuania was capable to cope on its own with this crisis, which showed maturity of the state. We didn't knock on which would be the easiest, knock on the IMF and say, "Oh, look at this. That's it. We cannot. We give up." So we were able to go through this on our own. Of course, the
austerity program.
We went through austerity program. And we jumped, we had a big drop in GDP the first year, 2000, but then the next year already we picked up, and we were able to convince the lenders. Of course, we paid some extra for this, because the risks were, of course, higher in Lithuania. But our policy, which we were explaining, and the people who believed in us, they earned some money. Clearly, they earned some money on that, but you needed to believe. It was American investors, it was also some European investors and so on. So yeah, we went through, and I think we came out of this stronger, not weaker. With some signs of clearly that we are maturing ourselves.
So I want to ask you further about the economy, the Lithuanian economy, but I just want to finish this your personal. The personal side of this, if you like. You were here in, if I remember right, if I got this right, you were here in 1998, 2001.
Yes.
And now you're here again.
Yeah.
The obvious question, of course, is what sort of differences do you find in Washington with a period like that? And also, is it different to work in as a diplomat from what it was then? In other words, has there been any change in the... I'm not necessarily referring to Trump.
There are very big, too big, if you can...
Right.
One big thing, of course, at that time I was the first secretary responsible for economic affairs, and now I'm ambassador. So clearly, that's quite a different perspective and involvement in what's going on. Of course, even at that time in '98, and today, Washington is the world capital of diplomacy.
Right.
So anyone coming here, will be pleased with the job, because there is not a single issue globally which cannot get a reflection there.
Right.
So it's very important, and I think it's also it should be a dream come true for the diplomat during his career to stop by and to work in Washington and there. And of course, as I said, first secretary and ambassador, that a big difference. So it's really a big difference. And then, of course, we should remember another big difference was 2001, September 11th, because I left in June, and we were living. I remember with my family, we were living in Crystal City. So from my balcony, I could see a Pentagon, and of course, it was mind blowing to see all those pictures on TV just in a couple of months after we left United States, because so it's really was shocking. It's unbelievable. It was really unbelievable and tragic for us with my family. We very emotionally lived through this because it was very, as I said, stressing and shocking to see the pictures for everybody, but especially I think for the ones who just left or spent some time there. and so on. So it was difficult to imagine what was those days in Washington at that time, and what was the situation. But of course, it changed country quite substantially. And so the U.S. before September 11 and U.S. after September 11 is different. The Washington as a city itself is, I think it's improved. Of course, in some areas, and in some areas you would say probably not so much, because the traffic jams, I don't know, probably everyone is feeling that it's much different case, just 17 years ago and right now, because it seems like the new office buildings are popping up. Of course, there are some districts which you would never enter. For example, at night, now you will see as a cozy restaurant, streets, and so on. So it's demographics, of course, changed, and the easiness of living, yes, it changed. And even in this year, we felt, that security situation is much different. There used to be a number of embassies there which moved from this area.
Yes.
And I do remember when I was 17 years ago, it was, in dark times, you would consider to go to metro station. They are not. So. And I know that Spanish diplomats were, having some
across the street.
Across the streets. There were some occasions when somebody got mugged, and so
Absolutely.
on. So that was not the safest area.
Right.
Now it's a different case
Right.
in there. So yeah, the Washington changed. The politics also changed, but that's something you would take for granted because nothing stands still. So everything is moving.
You yourselves are having the presidential election next year, isn't that it?
Exactly. Yes. That also will be a big change for us because we have, we elected the first lady president in our history, and she was the first president also who was elected for the 2 consecutive terms.
Yes.
So in a row. So we had a 10-year. The next year will be 10 years of the presidency of.
But she can't run again.
No, that's a limit of 2. So that's 10 years. So that's why it will be a change, because if she's running, maybe the people will choose her again because they like her presidency. But no, it will be a change for us because there will be 10 years of Madam Grybauskaitė, and of course then we.
What is she going to do? Does she know? Do you know? Does anybody know?
I don't know.
Teach? No.
Believe me, she has plenty of proposals related to different teaching, and I know that some are in the United States, coming from the United States,
really?
but it's up to her. So I think she's making her mind, but she's knowing her, she's very active. So I don't imagine her to be, still she's very active. She wants to make a difference, and I hope we will see her.
How would you characterize bilateral relations with the United States? I mean, you have said before, earlier, that there is this bond which goes back historically, but today, or let's put it another way, when you leave, what do you hope to have achieved that hasn't happened already?
Oh, it's a very tricky question. You always want to make a difference, and of course, you ask about my background. So of course, my background is more economic. So I very much was and are willing, to really, because I think the economic ties are the very strong basis for any kind of political cooperation and so on. So of course, I would like to see that and we are seeing that our bilateral trade is increasing every year. So it never stops, it stands still. So even the dollar-euro exchange rate changes, fluctuates forth and back, but it does not limit, the trade volumes between our countries. I do see a very positive trend that the tourism is increasing from U.S. to Lithuania. So the last year was the first year when the U.S. was among top 10 countries where the people are coming from which the people are coming to visit Lithuania. So it also shows, people-to-people relationships. It seems that Americans are more curious about. Of course, there's numbers are still not, something you would say, everyone in the United States is going to Lithuania. Probably will not be able to accommodate everyone here. And so on. But I like the steady growth there. So yeah, I would like to see more economic cooperation.
What is the
more
trade?
business
What's the amount of trade between the two countries?
Now it's getting close to 1.7 billion, which is for US it's not a big thing.
Right.
But if you look among the Lithuanian trading partners, so you would see that US is knocking on the door of top five, top 6. So in any case, you are among top 10 trading partners for us. And the distance, doesn't change much.
And
so
the exports, the Lithuanian exports are mainly?
You could find very big variety. Some dairy products. You would find the chemical products of chemical industry. You will find furniture. We are one of the bigger suppliers for IKEA, for example. So a lot of what the IKEA is selling is manufacturing actually in Lithuania.
I see. Yes.
And that's why, for example, one of the companies which is currently Lithuanian companies which is considering investing in Pennsylvania, which could be hundreds of jobs created in the United States, is one of the major suppliers for IKEA. So they see that they want to be closer to the client, and it makes sense. And what they made a study. Now it seems like they stopped on the Pennsylvania. They're discussing with the local authorities what would be the spots and what would be the conditions. Of course, everyone's to get the best deal possible. Right. So we'll see where it ends up. But I hope that it could be the largest Lithuanian investment in the United States, creating hundreds of jobs and quite a substantial one. So yeah, I do see a lot of good movement from both sides. And of course, LNG, for example, it's another very interesting topic for us because the Lithuania was just some 4 years ago. We were completely dependent on the supplies of gas from Russia.
Right.
And Russia was, in our assessment, misusing its monopoly position because they were pricing their gas, and we were paying the largest price for gas in European Union. And it was difficult to explain it in any economic terms because the gas to Germany travels much longer distance than the gas traveling to Lithuania. But, as I said, we had no options. We had only one pipeline coming from the east, and the only gas which was put in this pipeline was the Gazprom gas. And of course, then we decided to build an LNG terminal.
Oh, right.
And we did it. And the last year was a breakthrough year for us in our bilateral relationship with the United States because the last year was the first year when the U.S. LNG came to Lithuania. And of course, we would like to buy more LNG from U.S. And that's why I also coming back to the summit, which was not just a meeting in the White House, where of course we had lunch with Secretary Mattis and other key people, the Wilbur Ross and other secretaries and presidents, of course. But we had also business summit, where the business from Lithuania, that's Latvia and Estonia, were having meetings with business from United States. Yes. And at the outskirts of this business forum, two Lithuanian companies signed MOUs on LNG with U.S. company. There is a new developer which will be looking forward to open next year. They will be opening LNG terminal in U.S. and we signed an MOU on cooperation on the LNG know-how transfer, where we could work together with U.S. company to help the other countries to build LNG. So we are using our knowledge.
Neighboring countries.
Yeah, neighboring countries or some others. And the other agreement was with another Lithuanian company for potential purchase of LNG from United States. Yeah. So that's another important topic for us.
Is there a price factor? I mean,
there is always a price factor.
Is that competitive with what you'd be able to get from the Russians?
It is. It is sometimes. Sometimes not. So it depends, what...
Well, I mean, it may be politically
it is.
Competitive.
If it's not, we will not be buying, otherwise, So LNG terminal just enables us to buy gas from wherever we want. And if the price is right, and we have, of course, it depends still, is it on spot, is it just one off, is it a longer term, and so on. So, yeah. So there are a lot of parts in it. But under certain conditions, it makes sense for us to import the LNG from the United States.
And isn't there another pipeline being considered? Would that...
The one pipeline will be, which is currently in the process of being built, is to connect Lithuania to Poland. So, And also another two important projects which I could mention, which were recently done, is to connect also Lithuania and the Baltics. When I talk Lithuania, LNG of Lithuania also gives capacity to import gas for Latvia and Estonia. So it's not just for Lithuania, it's just for the region. So, and if there are any trouble with the gas supply, we always could buy, from anywhere. Of course, it could be, cheaper, it could be more expensive, but there are no the crisis situation where we are left without gas. And that's important. And also the other projects which were important also for other Baltic states, it's electricity grid connections. So we built, just a couple of years, we built a undersea cable to connect us to Sweden. And of course, connecting Lithuania, you connect also Baltics. And we built another electricity transmission line to Poland, so connecting us to Poland. So now we are much better connected than we were just 4 years ago. And when we were discussing that Baltic states, we are part of the EU, but we are energy island because we are not connected by transmission lines, by pipelines, by nothing. We are still like a separate entity. And those projects were very key and very strategic for us.
You're all three of you in the Eurozone, are you not?
Yes.
I mean, you got in immediately, whenever it was that you actually...
Whenever there are certain conditions you need to, criteria you need to pass.
Was it 2000?
No, it was later for us. 2004, actually, yesterday we celebrated the anniversary of our joining of the EU. It was May 1st, 2004.
And because, but you joined with the big, with the big enlargement yourselves and the Baltics and the Czechs and the Hungarians and the Poles. And the Maltese and the Cypriots.
Yes, and Cyprus. Yeah, exactly.
I see. Well, I wanted also to ask you, going back to the bilateral relations, is there a Lithuanian diaspora in the United States?
Yes, actually the largest diaspora of Lithuanians are living in the United States. And we even distinguish the waves of emigration in the United States.
You mean late 19th century?
Yeah, exactly. So that was the first wave where the people where Lithuania still was not free. It was still occupied by Russian Empire. But some Lithuanians was once very established, and which we're celebrating centennial. It's 1918. We announced independence, and
then the communist during communist times, presumably you had.
And so that was the first wave. A lot of the first wavers also came to build new states. So there are American Lithuanians were very instrumental in our building of our state back 100 years ago. And of course, if to compare also, you would find American Lithuanian newspapers, which are older than our re-established state. The oldest newspaper called Friend, which is Draugas in Lithuanian, which is still being published in Chicago, which is the largest concentration of Lithuanian Americans. That's the largest, Chicago. They counted a year ago 107 years. So that's even older than the re-established Lithuanian state. But then the second wave of immigrants from Lithuania came after World War II, because, of course, when the Soviets came and occupied Lithuania, thousands were sent to Siberia, thousands were killed, and so we lost a lot of people. And of course, people, when they saw that the Soviets moving back in, so they were running from Soviets because they knew what to expect in there. So that's why so-called displaced people, or DPs, they are the other generation of the immigrants in there. And of course, the most recent one is the newly, after independence in 1990, when the borders opened, anyone could go anywhere. And there, so of course, some people would choose United States to emigrate to United States. So those are much younger people usually, and so on. So and some of them very young. If you go to San Francisco, so you see that most of the Lithuanian Americans there, which are not big in numbers, but they are like below 30.
Oh, really?
And so all of the like computer people, internet generation, and so on. So which I'm trying to make it big in San Francisco.
Is there a reverse migration?
Yes, there's a reverse. We still have a negative flow, if you look, but it's stabilizing.
Otherwise, people come here, they learn professions, or they then they go back and they...
So in US, I would see that there are more people who are immigrating high-skilled people. So they want to go to Wall Street, to bigger banks, or scientists. There are quite a number of scientists, which is, I think, good for US. Of course, we would like to receive them back, but you understand that if you want to get into some very complex research, there are not many places you could choose. So some areas will bring you to the United States because there are certain researches being done and you join a team. So I would see a lot of biotech scientists from Lithuania, which is a strong sector in Lithuania, are working in different places in US.
Biotech is a strong sector in Lithuania.
It's a strong sector in Lithuania. And actually one of the major players there, for example, is US company, which bought the Lithuanian company, Thermo Fisher Scientific. So they have a facility in Vilnius, and they are working on the very complex research and products which are being used. For example, some of them are being used for the medicine against cancer. Right. So there's some products, the most innovative ones, most promising, currently being discussed. So part of this is being manufactured in Lithuania, for example. And some people, for example, like Professor Kriščiūnas, I hope that he could be one of the Lithuanian-born Nobel Prize winner, because he made quite a substantial to our assessment, because of course it will be important how it's being seen by the Nobel Commission. He made quite a substantial impact in this gene editing technology innovation. So there are quite a number of universities which are competing who contributed more, but he's one of those who also was a front runner, one of the pioneers who made research, and that shows that biotechnology in general, we have a very good biotechnology people starting from universities and from the companies.
But that's, the other thing is, Lithuania had a referendum to join the EU, if I remember right.
Yes.
And the referendum was overwhelmingly positive.
Yes.
It was a yes-no referendum, if I remember rightly, and the yes was the best. Since then, has there been any change in the public attitude towards the EU? That has happened in some other countries which feel that they are having maybe second thoughts, not second thoughts in the British sense, but second thoughts, trying to renegotiate some part.
No, we are actually one of the most over-optimistic countries in the European Union. So if you would ask people, you would see that overwhelming majority is in support of the EU institutions, trusting EU institutions, and of course very happy with the Lithuania's membership in EU. So that's one of the most positive grades you will see among all member states in there. And the other Baltics also not very far. So Latvia and Estonia.
This seems to be common in the Baltics.
Exactly. So I think, of course, sometimes it's puzzling me, why we see more in it, than some others, like Hungary or some other country,
Poland, next door.
Or Poland, that's. But I think it might be historical reasons. It might be, just some other reasons. But I don't know how deep you need to go into this. But in a sense, yes, we do enjoy, and we enjoy what we see. We like to be a part of this strong family, which is of course chosen in the democratic way of development, which is the best system we believe. And of course, being a captive nation for so long, so it's, so you really treasure, this family-like approach to there. When everyone is there just because they believe in the same kind of values. They see their life in more in the same trajectory. And of course, the EU brought peace to Europe. If you look at the history, it never was so free, so peaceful, and actually so wealthy in this regard. So, of course, we like to be a part of EU, and we are very positive. And that's also very interesting. What I see, and I like to stress this, that sometimes I don't know why, but the question: if you are so pro-EU, maybe you are anti-American. It's not, So you don't need to be pro-EU and to be anti-American. So Lithuanians and I believe Latvians and Estonians are the most pro-American people in Europe, and we just talked for the reasons of that. So, and I was joking when we had the centennial celebration in the Ronald Reagan building, which is also very symbolic because Ronald Reagan is the most respected president in Lithuania, the best known, So he was fighting evil empire, and all of Lithuanians were rooting for him, that he will one day he will succeed, and he succeeded in this. So then, and it was very symbolic. So we had a celebration, and I told during this reception in my remarks, jokingly that Lithuanians will never run out of high fives for Americans. So, whatever, you should be proud to be American, on the streets in Lithuania, and everyone will, really come and say. And when we had American soldiers, there was a company-sized regiment in Lithuania. So I was meeting the soldiers, and they were very surprised how people are, seeing them and Americans. So the people will come and talk, so they really saw that what they do there is very much appreciated. And that's how it is, and that's how it will be in our case, because as I said, there are a lot of historical reasons because of the principled policy of non-recognition by US. There are a lot of ties because of diaspora, the people who are Americans. Some of Lithuanian Americans, they don't speak Lithuanian, because they came like hundreds of years ago, and so on. But they are a very strong tie between the Lithuania and the United States. And of course, we are partners. We see the world in the same way. We chose the democratic path of development, and that's why I think we should stay together as partners. And we are just more than partners. I would say we are friends.
The transition from being under Soviet control to becoming again a democratic country appears to have been less complex in the Baltics than it was in Eastern European countries. Is that an impression, or is that true?
It is true.
I mean,
it is really true. And there are, I think you could, the scientists could research it and then come up with a number of reasons. But some are historical. For example, myself, I could tell you that when I was a kid, of course, I was attending Soviet school, and I finished high school in 1989. In Lithuania, which was already, you had glasnost, all this kind of, relaxation of the regime. And we already had Sąjūdis, which led us to independence, the people who were expressing freely their opinion. And we had, for example, myself, after high school, I entered university, which was closed by Soviets, because that was a major university in independent Lithuania. When the Soviets occupied, they knew that the most dangerous people are the ones educated. So the professors, librarians were the first candidates to be sent to Siberia. Because, if you want to subdue the nation, you need to take intelligentsia out of the equation. Yeah, exactly. And teachers and others. So that's, and of course the universities were closed up. The key university was just, to all professors gone, and to build a new Soviet type of university which will educate them in the right way, the students, and so on. So in 1989, this university was reopened. So it's already was kind of relaxed, that it was reopened. And American professors, American Lithuanians mostly, and this university was opened as like the first in Lithuania to take over the system from the United States. University system, baccalaureate and master degree studies and so on. So I was one of the first students, to enter this university. So the first group of students. in there. So that was already, everything was moving at that time.
Right.
But still I was a part of the Soviet high school all those years. And of course, some people would question how it was in there. I do remember in at my home, of course, in school, we had Lithuanian history was like this.
Right.
And the Soviet history was like that. So in Soviet history, everything what was happening in Russia was leading to this glorious revolution of 1917. You know, so and so on. It was always class fights, you know, there.
Right.
And Lithuanian history, which was part of it, was very, very inconvenient for Russia, because the Lithuanians and Poles, Confederation of Lithuania and Poland, we were sieging Moscow for a number of times. We were fighting, you know, for Belarus, and Belarus was a part of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. Ukraine was a part of Grand Duchy of Lithuania. So the wars were much more successful, you know, in early ages.
Right.
Just, you know, our trouble started somewhere in 18th century, and there when we lost our independence. But Lithuania was a state back in 13th century. We had a king, we had grand dukes, and so on. So it's a glorious history, which is impossible to hide. And when I was a kid, of course, you could give me a Soviet book, and I will look what's in the Soviet book. But coming back home, my father had a history of Lithuania published in between two world wars.
Yeah.
So I will open, and of course, as a kid, you were impressed about these glorious victories and how big you've been, and how tough and how smart your kings were, you know, and how grand dukes and so on. And you were, you know, on your own. So of course, you start to question, why am I in Soviet Union? What is this? Why we cannot go out? And so it was different. Of course, there are historical reasons, and for Latvians and Estonians too. We spent in Soviet Union shorter period than the others. We, in the Soviet Union, we were different because we are not Slavic nations, you know. There are, of course, other nations which are not Slavic. But you felt that, and even Russians, they would feel that the simple people, not simple people, ordinary people, we would say, the people would say, oh, you are different. And all the movies which were filmed in Soviet Union and you wanted to show abroad, they were filmed in Riga, Tallinn, or Vilnius, you know, because those were like foreign-looking countries. So you could get this old town, which is very beautiful, and the same old town you could find in Italy or somewhere else, you know. So we were different. Then, of course, the size probably was also of an issue. We didn't have very big companies, which were taken by oligarchs, you know. And I think that also helped, because if you look at Ukraine is a big country, they had a very big factories. And if somebody was smart to privatize it with some shadow dealing or maybe in transparent way, I don't know, so it became very important. So, and of course, you don't want to lose what you already got. That's a constant struggle, you know, of the progress. The ones who got it, and if you don't, the state doesn't help the newcomers to come in, and if you have an idea, you know, to succeed, so, and you let to protect the wealth and the monopolize the economy, of course, that's the trouble ahead of you is awaiting somewhere. And of course, we didn't have such a huge factories which could make somebody so powerful and so on. So we don't have basically oligarchs of, you know, the size of oligarchs.
What is the relationship now with Poland?
I would say it's the best we had for a long time, because I think the worst period of in our historical ties, of course, were between two world wars, and that shows. And I always stress, you know, that when we were divided, we were the weakest. All of us we lost, you know, by the end of the day. When we were together with Poland, partners and friends, and we always were much stronger. So now I would say, yes, we have a good relationship with Poland, and I think that it will be, and I hope that it will be only improving.
Now, the Radzivills, are they Poles or Lithuanians?
Who?
Radzivills.
In Lithuania, yes, for us they are Lithuanian.
They are
from Grand Duchy of Lithuania. And because, you know, spending centuries together, having there, so there is a lot of, but for example, we are celebrating, and just last week I was at the West Point where we are commemorating Kriščiūnas.
Oh, right, yes.
Who is also a hero in Lithuania, because he was a hero of Commonwealth of Poland, Lithuania. Of course, he spoke Polish. You know, he was born in the territory of today's Belarus, which was Grand Duchy of Lithuania,
of course,
and so on. And when he was revolting against the Russian Tsar, So he was issuing proclamations to Lithuanians and to Poles, that we need to fight for our common there. So, of course, he's a hero in Lithuania, and we will pay respect to the Kriščiūnas. And he's a hero in the United States, because he was a hero of the Battle of Saratoga, and the West Point and Kriščiūnas legacy is inseparable. So
yes, the interesting thing about that, of course, is that there's I'm sure you know this, but there's been a revival, not a reversal really, but there's been a sort of reassessment of who did what in the American Revolution. And Kosciuszko's getting a lot more credit these days from writers than he did during the period when the Americans were insisting that they did it all by themselves. I mean, today, Kosciuszko, Rochambeau, not so much Lafayette, who was sort of a peon, basically, but Rochambeau and the Spaniards, and the role of the Spaniards in the South,
I know,
is now beginning to surface.
I was pleased to be invited to celebrate the 300th anniversary of New Orleans just a couple of weeks ago.
Yes.
And the Spanish ambassador, the consul was there, but they also opened, there was opening of the museum in the center of there to show the impact of Spanish on Spain, into the independence wars.
The king is going to visit it next month.
Yeah. So it's impressive. Yeah, it's always, you need to look back, and they said it's but looking back, you need to learn from the past, and looking forward, so I would say there's a lot of future for us, with Poland and the other neighbors, and I hope with Russia too. Right. There's a bright future somewhere ahead. Right now it seems like, there are tension and so on, and it's strange for us to see this. But, I do hope that something will change in Russia one day, and we will have a very normal, business-like relationship with any political...
as I understand it, the struggle for the succession has already begun. They tell me.
Yeah, it's...
so you never know.
Yeah, it's an important topic for everyone. But the big difference we should understand, that if you look at the relationship between Russia and the rest of former Soviet Union, so-called, one good example is that when there was a trial to subdue the freedom movement in Lithuania back in 1991, it was January 13th when we lost the biggest human life count was lost, and we lost some people there. So it was a bloody night for us. When the Russian Soviets, not Russian, sorry for that, the Soviet forces, they decided, okay, we need to crack down on Lithuania, because we are the first Lithuanians. They are the first to announce independence from the Soviet Union, and we were already electing our parliament. We were so, but we just couldn't control our borders because the Red Army was still there. But the life was already on our terms inside the country. The government, the parliament, so the people elected them and so on. And of course it was, the Soviets were at loss at some time, for some time. And then they wanted to crack down. And it was, as I said, fateful night of January 13th, 1991. When a number of Lithuanians lost, peaceful Lithuanians standing by the TV station, because they were taking over the TV station with the tanks and guns, and so some people were killed there. And it was not an era of social media, could you believe this? It took some week or so, some days, for the hundreds of thousands of Russians to go to the streets of Moscow to protest what was happening in Vilnius. And at that time, 1991, I remember, not every household had a phone, fixed line phone, in there. No social media. So how many calls it took? And some Russian dissidents I meet in Washington, for example, they said that probably was still the largest, till now, demonstration in Russia. When the hundreds of thousands of Russians went to the streets to protest, clap down on Lithuania. So they were with us, with Lithuanians. And that's why, and of course it pushed Yeltsin up.
Of course,
and the Yeltsin, of course, was a very respected figure in Lithuania sense, because he said that Russia is also a victim of Soviet Union. So so all the Soviet Union were victims of Soviet regime, including Russia. So he put kind of all the republics at the same level.
Yeah.
Russia was just one of the victims.
Yeah.
So you all were victims. But the Putin, when he came to power, he said no. Basically, he reversed it. He said no. The largest geopolitical tragedy of 20th century was the collapse of Soviet Union. Yeah. So he said clearly, Soviet Union was a Russian Empire, just was named differently.